hours after I told her my husband and my 2 children were dead. I remember the silence that followed, 7 seconds on the phone before she ended the call. I was still standing in the hospital hallway, wearing the same scrubs I had started my shift in that morning, and it felt as if the entire world had simply stopped moving. My husband Daniel, my daughter Emma, my little boy Lucas, all gone. And my mother chose a birthday cake over their coffins. But that phone call didn't destroy me. In a strange way, it set me free. Because 6 months later, a single newspaper headline about what I did with the $3.8 million Daniel had quietly arranged for me would send my entire family into a panic they would never recover from. What they didn't understand yet was this. By skipping that funeral, they didn't just lose a daughter. They lost everything. Before I tell you what happened next, if this story resonates with you, take a second to right now. My name is Wendy Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and I work as an ER nurse in Raleigh, North Carolina. Let me take you back to a cold evening in November. The night everything in my life collapsed, and the night I finally understood who my family really was. Before that evening, my life was simple and quietly happy. Nothing glamorous, nothing worth posting on social media, just good. Daniel and I lived in a modest 3-bedroom colonial in Cary, about 20 minutes outside Raleigh. He worked as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech company in Durham. I worked night shifts at St. Matthew Medical Center. We had bought our house 2 years earlier with a small down payment and a lot of hope for the future. Emma was 6 years old. She had Daniel's brown eyes and my stubborn streak. Lucas was 4 and carried a stuffed bear named Captain everywhere he went, into grocery stores, into the bathtub, even to church on Sundays. Daniel and I met because he cut his hand while helping a coworker move a desk. He walked into my ER at 2 in the morning with a dish towel wrapped around his hand and blood soaking through the fabric. While I stitched the wound, he asked if the scar would look cool. I told him probably not. He asked for my number anyway. That was Daniel Carter, my husband. He was always calm, kind, and steady, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order after hearing it once. In the Bennett family, my birth family, I was always the invisible one. The oldest daughter who never caused trouble, never asked for help, and never needed rescuing. I paid my own way through nursing school. I even organized my own wedding, a small ceremony at the courthouse because my parents said they couldn't afford anything bigger. But that same year, they somehow found the money for Olivia's Sweet 16 party. 70 guests, a DJ, a rented hall. Every holiday followed the same pattern. I cooked, I cleaned, I bought the gifts. My mother, Charlotte, never once asked how my shifts were going or whether Emma had started kindergarten yet. Her phone calls always began the same way. "What are you bringing for dinner?" Daniel noticed it long before I did. One Thanksgiving, as we were loading the car after I had spent 9 straight hours in my mother's kitchen, he turned to me and said quietly, "Your family treats you like hired help, Wendy." And I shrugged it off the way I always did. "They're just like that," I told him. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. I just didn't understand that yet. And Daniel, quiet and observant as always, had already started preparing for the day I finally would. November 14th. A Tuesday. I was halfway through my shift when the charge nurse touched my shoulder. "Wendy, break room, now." I knew that tone immediately. I had used it myself many times. The calm, careful voice reserved for delivering the worst news imaginable. I followed her down the hallway. My body seemed to know before my mind did. 2 North Carolina state troopers were standing inside the room. One held his hat against his chest, the other couldn't meet my eyes. "Mrs. Bennett," one of them said gently, "there's been an accident on Interstate 40. Daniel had picked Emma and Lucas up from swim lessons at the YMCA. They were only 7 minutes from home. A man named Travis Coleman, 41 years old, with a blood alcohol level more than twice the legal limit, ran a red light at 53 miles per hour and slammed into the passenger side of their car. Daniel died at the scene. Emma died in the ambulance. Lucas made it to St. Matthew Medical Center, my hospital, my ER. But I was still in the break room when they rushed him through the doors. The ambulance took Lucas to St. Matthew because it was the nearest pediatric trauma unit available. He was gone before I reached the trauma bay. 3 minutes. That's what the trooper told me. 3 minutes between my break room and my son's final breath. I don't remember sitting down. I remember the cold linoleum floor, the harsh fluorescent lights humming above me, as if the world hadn't just ended. My coworker Rachel knelt beside me. She didn't say anything. She just held my hand. Eventually, I don't know how much time had passed, I picked up my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I called my mother. It was instinct. When your world collapses, you call your mom. The phone rang 4 times. In the background I could hear music, laughter, Olivia singing loudly and completely off-key. Then my mother answered. "Hello, Wendy. Make it quick. We're about to cut the cake." "Mom." My voice broke on the word. "Daniel is dead. Emma and Lucas are dead. I need you." There was silence. 3 seconds. Then 5. Behind her, the party continued. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped into that familiar whisper she used whenever she didn't want guests overhearing something unpleasant. "Wendy, I hear you. That's terrible. But today is Olivia's birthday. We have 30 people here. We can't just leave." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, convinced I must have heard her wrong. "Mom, my husband, my children, they're gone." "I know, honey," Charlotte said. "But what exactly do you expect me to do right now? Olivia would be devastated if we walked out of her party. Call your friend from the hospital, she'll help you. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" Then the line went dead. 9:47 p.m. The call lasted 3 minutes and 12 seconds. I know because I stared at the call log for nearly an hour afterward. I dialed my father next. William Bennett answered on the second ring. I could hear the creak of the screen door as he stepped outside, wind brushing against the receiver. "Dad, did Mom tell you?" There was a pause. "Yeah, kiddo. She mentioned it," he said quietly. "We'll come see you next week. Just hang in there." He hung up too. 1 call left. Olivia. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, though I barely remember recording it. 2 hours later, she texted back. "Mom told me. So sorry. Call me TMRW." I stayed on that hospital floor until my shift supervisor found me around midnight. 3 phone calls. 3 chances for my family to show up. 3 doors quietly slammed shut. That was the moment something inside me finally snapped into focus. For 34 years I had told myself they didn't mean it. That they were busy. That they were just distracted. But they weren't confused. They weren't overwhelmed. They looked at the worst night of my life, glanced at the birthday cake and balloons around them, and made their decision. The funeral was held on Saturday, November 18th. Rain fell in a cold, steady curtain that turned the cemetery grass into mud. Pastor Elaine Harper, from Hope Valley Community Church, led the service. She had baptized both Emma and Lucas. When I called her with the news, she showed up at my house at 6 the next morning carrying coffee and a binder full of options. She never asked about my family. Instead, she said gently, "Tell me what they loved." Emma loved butterflies. Lucas loved his stuffed bear captain. Daniel loved Bruce Springsteen. So we played If I Should Fall Behind while the rain tapped softly against the canopy, and I stood before 3 caskets, 1 full-sized, 2 heartbreakingly small, trying to say goodbye to my entire world. My co-workers came. Rachel, Denise, Derek, Dr. Aaron Sullivan from the ER. They wore black scrubs under their coats, because most of them had come straight from their shifts. Nathan Brooks, Daniel's college roommate, flew in overnight from Boston. He stood beside me the entire service, holding an umbrella over my head, even though the rain soaked through his own jacket. I placed Captain inside Lucas's casket. I pinned Emma's butterfly barrette to the small satin pillow beneath her head. I touched Daniel's hand one last time and whispered something I'll keep to myself forever. Then I looked toward the front row. The seats reserved for family. Empty. Every one of them. 4 white folding chairs collecting rainwater. Not a single Bennett. Pastor Elaine followed my gaze. She reached over and gently squeezed my wrist. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. After the burial, Nathan helped me carry flowers back to the car. When we reached the driver's side, he stopped and looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Confusion mixed with something sharper. "Wendy, where's your family?" I shook my head. That was all I could manage. Nathan watched me for a long moment, rain running down his face. Finally, he nodded once and said nothing more. But I could tell he had taken note. Somewhere behind those journalist eyes, a clock had started ticking. 1 week after the funeral, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But 34 years of conditioning is hard to override in 7 days. My thumb hit the green button before my brain could stop it. "Wendy," Charlotte said brightly, "Thanksgiving is next Thursday. Are you bringing the casserole? Olivia wants the green bean one." I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. 3 caskets, 7 days, and my mother was asking about casserole. "Mom, I just buried my family." "I know, honey," she said gently. "That's exactly why you shouldn't be alone. Come for Thanksgiving. It'll be good for you. Sitting in that house by yourself isn't healthy." Her voice sounded warm, compassionate, perfectly reasonable. If anyone overheard that conversation without context, they would assume she was a caring mother reaching out to her grieving daughter. That was Charlotte Bennett's gift. She always sounded like the good person in the story. But I could hear the machinery underneath. Come to Thanksgiving, bring the casserole, stand in the kitchen, serve the family, smile, perform. By dessert, the funeral would become a sad inconvenience from last month, filed away somewhere between Olivia's dental bills and my father's garage project. "I can't do that, Mom." "Don't be dramatic, we're your family." I ended the call. No explanation, no argument. The first time in my life. She called back 4 times. I let the phone ring. Eventually, she left a voicemail. "Wendy, this is ridiculous. You can't just shut your family out. Call me back." I stood in my kitchen. Daniel's coffee mug was still sitting on the counter. Emma's drawing of a purple horse was still taped to the refrigerator. Lucas's booster seat still sat at the table. And suddenly something became painfully clear. If I went back to that Thanksgiving table, I would never leave it. I would spend the rest of my life serving people who hadn't even bothered to attend my children's funeral. That was not going to be my future. Not anymore. I typed one message into the family group chat. No capital letters, no punctuation. I need space. Please don't contact me. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Then I set the phone down and waited. Charlotte replied 90 seconds later. "This is unacceptable. You do not get to disappear from this family." 2 minutes after that, my father wrote, "Your mother is very upset. Please call her." An hour later, Olivia added, "Wow, okay, guess I don't have a sister anymore. Cool." I blocked all 3 numbers. I muted the group chat. Then I sat on the edge of my bed in a house that still smelled like Daniel's aftershave and let the silence settle around me like fresh snow. The next morning, I called a therapist. Dr. Melissa Grant had an office on Oakwood Avenue. Oddly enough, the name of the street felt almost symbolic for a grief counselor. Her office was small, 2 armchairs, tissue boxes everywhere. During our first session, Dr. Melissa Grant asked me a question that felt like someone had knocked the air out of my lungs. "When was the last time your family truly showed up for you?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. My mind drifted through memories, birthdays, graduations, Emma's first steps, Lucas's first word. I replayed those moments and thought carefully about who had been there and who hadn't. The answer settled heavily in my chest like a stone. Silence. Dr. Grant simply nodded. She didn't push me for more. "Then that's where we'll begin," she said quietly. I returned to work the following week. My colleagues stepped in without me even asking. Rachel traded shifts so I could ease back slowly. Derek took over my charts whenever things got overwhelming. Dr. Aaron Sullivan reassigned me to lower acuity cases until I felt steady enough again. But grief doesn't care about careful schedules. One night, a 19-year-old DUI victim came into the ER with a shattered pelvis. I managed to step into the supply closet before my legs gave out. That same week, Nathan Brooks called. "Just checking on you," he said. "How are you, really?" "I'm surviving," I told him. "For now, that's enough." Before we hung up, he mentioned something else. "Daniel's lawyer reached out," Nathan said. "Andrew Caldwell. He said he needs to talk to you about some paperwork Daniel filed. Do you know him?" I didn't. I had no idea Daniel even had a lawyer. Andrew Caldwell's office was on the second floor of a brick building in Chapel Hill, above a bakery that filled the stairwell with the smell of warm sourdough. He was a tall man in his mid-50s, wearing reading glasses and offering a handshake that felt reassuringly steady. "Daniel and I went to college together," he explained as he sat down behind his desk. "We stayed in touch. About 8 months before the accident, he came to see me. 8 months earlier would have been March. Around that time, Daniel had started locking his home office door every Sunday evening for about an hour. I had assumed he was catching up on work." Andrew slid a large manila envelope across the desk. "Daniel purchased a term life insurance policy 8 months before the accident," he said. "The amount is $3.8 million. You're the sole beneficiary." He paused before continuing. "Because the policy was new, the company performed a routine investigation. It took about 4 months. Everything checked out. Daniel was in excellent health when he applied. The crash was entirely the other driver's fault. The funds are ready to be released." I didn't move. The number didn't register at first. It felt too large, too unreal, like hearing a word in a language I didn't understand. $3.8 million. Daniel had earned a solid salary at his company. He was healthy, a non-smoker, only 36. The premiums had been manageable. Andrew cleared his throat slightly. "He set up the policy for a reason," he said carefully. "Daniel mentioned your family situation. Not in detail. He simply told me, if something ever happens to me, she'll be alone. Her family won't help her. I need to know she'll be taken care of." Inside the envelope was a letter. Daniel's handwriting curved across the page in the same left-handed script I used to tease him about. I didn't read it there in the office. It felt too personal, too exposed. But Andrew did tell me the last line, because Daniel had specifically asked him to if I hesitated. "You always take care of everyone else," the letter said. "Let me take care of you one last time." I pressed the envelope against my chest and cried. Not the numb, hollow crying I had done on the hospital floor. This was different, warmer. It was the grief of realizing how completely someone had loved me. Daniel had always understood something I hadn't wanted to admit, that the people who should have protected me never would. He couldn't save himself. But somehow he had still reached across death to protect me. I didn't touch the money for weeks after it arrived. It sat in escrow while I stared at my bedroom ceiling night after night, wondering what someone was supposed to do with $3.8 million that only existed because her family had died. Spending it on myself felt wrong. Leaving it untouched felt just as empty. The number felt like a ghost. Daniel-shaped, Emma-shaped, Lucas-shaped. Every time I thought about it, I saw their faces. Dr. Grant was the one who finally cracked the question open. "What would Daniel want you to do with it?" she asked. I thought about that for a long time. I remembered the 19-year-old DUI victim in our ER and the way his mother sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, wearing the same clothes she'd had on when the police knocked on her door. I thought about the sleepless nights after Daniel's funeral, when I searched online for financial help for families of drunk driving victims and found almost nothing in North Carolina. I thought about sitting alone in that rain-soaked cemetery. No family should have to face that kind of loss alone, I finally said. The idea started slowly, then suddenly it felt obvious. A foundation, not a plaque or a bench in a park, something practical, something that actually worked. A fund that could cover funeral expenses when families couldn't afford them. Help pay rent during those first unbearable months. Connect survivors with grief counselors. who actually answered their phones. That evening, I called Andrew. I want to start a foundation, I told him. In Daniel's name, and Emma's, and Lucas's. I'll help you set it up, he replied immediately. We'll register it as a 501c3. We'll do this properly. I kept a portion of the money for myself, enough to pay off the mortgage, build a small emergency fund, and breathe without panic. Daniel would have insisted. He was practical that way, and I was an ER nurse. I understood triage. What I didn't know was that this quiet decision, made in a therapist's office on a random Tuesday afternoon, would eventually appear on the front page of a newspaper. And that article would land in a house in Cary, where a woman named Charlotte Bennett was about to discover that the daughter she had dismissed had become someone she could no longer ignore. While I was building the foundation, something else was quietly building too: the truth. In a place like Raleigh, news travels fast. People talk at diners, they talk after church, they talk in grocery store checkout lines. And one question kept circulating in quiet conversations over coffee, casseroles, and choir rehearsals at Hope Valley Community Church. Where was Wendy Bennett's family? Pastor Elaine never said anything publicly. She didn't have to. She had presided over a funeral with 3 caskets and an empty front row. People noticed. People remembered. It started small. In January, during a church potluck, Charlotte Bennett was speaking with Margaret Collins from the Women's Fellowship when Margaret asked gently, "How is Wendy doing these days?" "We heard about the accident, it's just awful." My mother gave her practiced church smile, the one that looked compassionate but cost her absolutely nothing. "She's doing fine," Charlotte said smoothly. "She just needs a little time." Then Linda Prescott, our neighbor of 22 years, the woman who had watched me grow up, asked the question Charlotte wasn't prepared for. "Were you at the funeral, Charlotte? I didn't see you there." "We had a family commitment that day." Linda Prescott studied her for a moment. She didn't nod. She didn't respond. She simply looked at her, then lifted her plate and quietly moved to another table. Olivia began noticing it too. Her friends started asking about me. She stuck to the script our family had always used. "My sister is being dramatic. She cut us off for no reason." That explanation worked, until someone asked the obvious follow-up. "Wait, you didn't go to the funeral?" Olivia didn't have an answer for that. One evening, my mother called my father into the kitchen. I know this because William later told me in a text message I wasn't expecting. Charlotte stood at the counter with her arms folded and her jaw tight. "We need to get Wendy back before this gets worse," she said. "People are talking. Not we should apologize. Not we were wrong. Not our grandchildren are dead and we didn't even say goodbye. People are talking." That was what mattered to Charlotte Bennett. The image, the narrative, the performance. For 60 years she had carefully controlled the story our family told about itself. And now, for the first time in her life, someone else was holding the pen. By March, 4 months after the accident, the foundation paperwork was nearly finished. Andrew Caldwell had filed the 501c3 application. I drafted the mission statement at my kitchen table at 2 a.m, still wearing my scrubs, with Daniel's letter propped against the salt shaker. I had a name, the Carter Legacy Foundation, and I had a purpose. For the first time since November, I woke up each morning with a reason to get out of bed that wasn't simply obligation. Meanwhile, Charlotte had been busy too. My mother had always maintained a network: church friends, neighbors, distant relatives, acquaintances who seemed to know someone who knew something. Information moved the way it always does in smaller communities, slowly at first, and then all at once. Someone mentioned during a fellowship dinner that Wendy Bennett had received a significant insurance payout. Someone else mentioned the word foundation. By the time the story reached Charlotte, the details had already been polished into something irresistible. "Daniel left her money," she told my father. "A lot of it." "How much?" William asked. "Enough that she's starting some kind of charity." I can picture my father at that moment, sitting in his recliner with a beer balanced on the armrest, staring at the muted television while doing the math. Not emotional math, financial math. "Maybe we should call her," he suggested. But Charlotte knew better than to rely on a simple phone call. She already knew I had blocked their numbers, so she went to Pastor Elaine instead. Pastor, my daughter is grieving and pushing everyone away, Charlotte said softly. We're worried about her. Could you help us bring the family back together? Maybe a small prayer gathering, something gentle. Pastor Elaine listened carefully. She nodded once. I'll think about it, Charlotte, she said. But later that evening, alone in her study, Pastor Elaine sat quietly remembering 3 caskets and 4 empty chairs, and she thought very carefully about what the word gentle meant when someone like Charlotte Bennett used it. 2 weeks later, Nathan Brooks called me again. I pitched a feature story to my editor about DUI victim advocacy in North Carolina, he said. I disclosed that Daniel was my friend. She approved the idea on one condition. I focus on the larger system, not just your personal story, but your foundation is the centerpiece. What kind of story? I asked. What resources exist for families like yours? He explained. What's missing? Where the gaps are? Your foundation fills one of those gaps perfectly. Would you be willing to do an interview? I hesitated. Public attention had never been something I wanted. I was a night shift ER nurse. My version of public speaking was reading triage notes to a supervising doctor at 3 in the morning. But Nathan wasn't asking me to perform. He was asking me to tell the truth. And the truth was the only thing left in my life that still felt solid. Okay, I said finally. But I'm not doing this for attention. I know, Nathan replied. That's exactly why it matters. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital. Nathan placed a small recorder between our mugs and simply let me talk. I told him about Daniel, about the night we met and the stitches in his hand, about the question he asked me while I was sewing the wound closed. I told him about Emma's butterflies and Lucas's stuffed bear. I explained how Daniel had quietly spent Sunday evenings researching insurance policies behind a locked office door. I described the foundation and the 5 families we had already identified for our first round of assistance. Then Nathan asked quietly, You organized the funeral alone? I stirred my coffee. Daniel's friends were there, my co-workers, my pastor. Nathan didn't interrupt. He was very good at silence. My birth family wasn't, I added. He simply wrote that down. Before leaving, he asked one more question. Can I include that detail? I thought about it for exactly 1 breath. You can say what's true, I said. I won't ask you to hide anything, but I'm not adding drama either. At the same time, and I only learned this later, Charlotte was on the phone with Olivia. Her voice carried the brittle urgency of someone who could feel control slipping away. We need to talk to Wendy before someone else starts telling our story, Charlotte insisted. Olivia snorted. What story? We didn't do anything wrong. Exactly, Charlotte replied, and we need to make sure people understand that. Nathan told me the article would take a few more weeks. He still needed to interview other families and verify statistics before the editors would publish it. My parents had no idea it was coming. Charlotte, however, was already moving quickly. Within a week, she cornered Pastor Elaine after Sunday service. I've been praying about this, Charlotte said softly. Could we organize a small reconciliation meeting? Just family and a few close friends? Something simple. Prayer and conversation. Pastor Elaine agreed, though reluctantly. But I won't pressure Wendy, she said firmly. This has to be her choice. Of course, my mother replied smoothly. Of course. Then Charlotte went home and started making phone calls. By Saturday, what was supposed to be a quiet family meeting had grown into a gathering of nearly 20 people. The entire Women's Fellowship Board, several neighborhood couples, and even Linda Prescott, whom Charlotte specifically invited because Linda's earlier question at the potluck still stung. My mother wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses who would watch her cry, watch her reach out, and ultimately decide that I was the unreasonable one. The invitation reached me through a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Charlotte had borrowed someone else's phone. Wendy, Pastor Elaine is organizing a family prayer meeting this Sunday. Everyone from church wants to see you. Please come, for your children's memory. For your children's memory. She used their names like currency. I immediately called Pastor Elaine. Did you organize this? I asked. She sighed heavily. Your mother asked for a small gathering, she said. I agreed to that, but I just learned she's invited half the congregation. Wendy, I'm worried about what she's planning. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and thought about it for a long time. The old Wendy would have stayed home. She would have protected herself from the confrontation, but the old Wendy also would have shown up at Thanksgiving 3 weeks after burying her children, with a casserole in her hands and a polite smile. I wasn't that woman anymore. I'll be there, I told Pastor Elaine. Not for my mother, I said quietly. For me. Pastor Elaine was silent for a moment. Then she spoke again, her voice softer. There's something you should know, she said. I told your mother that I was at the funeral that day. Wendy, she didn't even blink. Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock, the fellowship room at Hope Valley Community Church. When I walked in, I counted automatically. 22 people, chairs arranged in a loose semicircle, a coffee urn steaming on a folding table, a plate of cookies someone had brought, because in North Carolina even ambushes come with baked goods. My mother sat in the front row. She wore her lavender church dress, the one she saved for occasions when she wanted to appear gentle. Her eyes were already red, and a white handkerchief rested neatly on her lap, perfectly positioned. My father sat beside her with stiff shoulders, staring at a spot on the carpet. Olivia stood near the back wall, arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked like she wished she were anywhere else. The moment I took my seat, Charlotte stood up. She didn't wait for Pastor Elaine to begin. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. As many of you know, our family has been through something terrible. My daughter Wendy lost her husband and her children in a tragic accident. We've tried to support her, but she's pushed us away. She dabbed delicately at the corner of her eye with the handkerchief. We're heartbroken. All we want is our daughter back. Soft murmurs filled the room, nods of sympathy, concerned glances directed toward Charlotte. She was very good at this performance, the shaking voice, the pauses, the way she managed to make the grief feel like something happening to her. Margaret Collins leaned forward slightly. Wendy, your mother loves you. Family is everything. From the back of the room, Olivia added her own contribution. I've texted her so many times, she said. She won't even answer. I lost a brother-in-law and a niece and nephew too, you know. 22 heads turned toward me. 22 faces waiting for me to apologize, to cry, to fold. Instead, I stood. The room fell silent. May I speak? My voice stayed calm. It didn't need to be louder. My husband and 2 children died on November 14th, I said. I called my mother from the hospital that night. The room was already quiet, but now it felt as if the air itself had hardened. She told me she couldn't come because it was Olivia's birthday party. Someone shifted in their chair. She said, we can't just leave, we'll visit next week. Charlotte opened her mouth. That's not... I have the call log, Mom, I said evenly. 9:47 p.m., 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Her mouth closed. My father told me to hang in there. My sister sent a text with a crying emoji and said to call her tomorrow. I paused. No one came to the hospital. No one came the next day. No one came to the funeral. I turned slightly toward Pastor Elaine. She was there, I said. She can confirm. Pastor Elaine met my eyes and nodded once. The family seats were empty, she said quietly. Someone in the second row inhaled sharply. Linda Prescott covered her mouth with her hand. Margaret Collins slowly set her coffee cup down and didn't pick it back up. Charlotte's composure cracked, only slightly, but enough to show the fracture. We had commitments, she said quickly. We couldn't just... Your commitment was a birthday party, I replied calmly. My commitment was burying my 6-year-old daughter. No one spoke. The cookies sat untouched. The coffee urn hissed softly in the corner. I didn't come here to argue, I said. I came because you asked. Now you've heard both sides. Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it the way you close a chapter, quietly, completely. In the parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me. Wendy, wait! Olivia ran up beside me, slightly out of breath. That wasn't fair, she said. You're making us look terrible. I unlocked my car. I didn't make you look like anything, I told her. I just told them what happened. She stood there in the gravel lot with her arms hanging awkwardly at her sides. For the first time in her life, Olivia had nothing to say. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her still standing there, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. 3 weeks after that meeting at church, Nathan's article finally went live. He had spent the extra time interviewing other families and speaking with advocacy groups, turning what began as my story into something larger. The headline appeared at the top of the Sunday feature section of the Triangle Chronicle. After losing her family to a drunk driver, Raleigh nurse turns grief into a mission. Nathan wrote about Daniel, the engineer who quietly prepared for the worst after watching a coworker's family collapse following a sudden death. He wrote about Emma, who wanted to become a marine biologist, and Lucas, who introduced his stuffed bear captain to every new person he met. He wrote about my mission, how I had already helped 5 families affected by drunk driving, covering funeral expenses, rent, and counseling costs from my own savings, while the Carter Legacy Foundation was still waiting for final approval. And in the 7th paragraph, there was a single sentence. Just one. Wendy Bennett organized the funeral with help from co-workers and friends. Her birth family, she said, was unable to attend. That was it. No names. No accusations, no dramatic language, just 8 quiet words that landed like a dropped piano. The article was shared more than 4,000 times within 48 hours. WRAL News called on Monday. Safe Roads Carolina emailed on Tuesday. A local radio producer left a message asking if I would come on air to talk about the foundation. My inbox filled with messages from strangers. A woman in Greensboro wrote, "My son was killed by a drunk driver last year. I couldn't afford his burial. Thank you for what you're doing." A retired firefighter in Winston-Salem wrote, "Your husband was a good man. You're honoring him the right way." I sat at my kitchen table reading those messages until 3 in the morning. The house was quiet. Daniel's coffee mug still sat on the counter. I hadn't moved it, and I wasn't ready to. Emma's drawing of a purple horse was still taped to the refrigerator. Lucas's booster seat was still at the table. I wasn't looking for attention. I wasn't trying to expose anyone. I was simply trying to build something meaningful so that 3 lives wouldn't be reduced to a number in a police report. But attention has a way of finding you whether you want it or not. About 30 miles away, in a house in Cary, Charlotte Bennett picked up her phone and read a text from Linda Prescott that said, "Charlotte, is this your Wendy?" Charlotte read the article 3 times. I know this because Olivia later told me, during one of the visits I hadn't asked for, that their mother sat at the kitchen table wearing her reading glasses, lips pressed into a thin white line, scrolling over the article again and again. Then the phone calls began. Margaret Collins called first. Her voice was polite and cautious. "Charlotte, I saw the article about Wendy. That poor girl. I had no idea she started a foundation. What a beautiful thing she's doing." A short pause followed. "It mentioned the funeral, that the family wasn't there." Charlotte answered quickly. "It's complicated, Margaret." "Of course," Margaret said quietly. Click. Next came Charlotte's sister in Florida, Aunt Marianne. She was less careful. "Charlotte, tell me you were at that funeral." "It's complicated," Charlotte repeated. There was a long silence. "What exactly is complicated about attending your grandchildren's funeral?" At church the following Sunday, the chairs around Charlotte seemed to shift slightly. No one confronted her directly. No one needed to. That's how small communities work. No shouting, no dramatic scenes, just subtle adjustments. The half-second delay before someone greets you, the invitation that never arrives, the empty chair beside you during coffee hour. Pastor Elaine never mentioned the article during service. Instead, she preached about presence, about the difference between saying you love someone and actually showing up when it matters. Charlotte sat through the sermon with perfect posture and folded hands. She left immediately afterward without staying for coffee. Olivia had a harder time online. A mutual friend shared the article with the caption, "This is the kind of strength the world needs." Someone commented beneath it, "Imagine choosing a birthday party over your niece and nephew's funeral." Olivia's name wasn't mentioned anywhere in the article, but in a town like ours, it didn't need to be. By Wednesday, she had deactivated her Facebook account. My father retreated into the garage. He spent hours sitting on a folding chair beside his workbench with a beer in his hand, saying very little to anyone. He didn't need social media to understand what had happened. He had always known. Then Charlotte left me a voicemail. This time she used her own number, as if daring me to answer. Her voice had lost the trembling softness she used in church meetings. It sounded sharp and raw. "Wendy, that article is destroying us. You need to fix this. Call that reporter and tell him to take it down." No apology. No, I'm sorry. Not even. "How are you holding up? Just fix this." Olivia appeared at my house the following Thursday evening without warning. I was in the kitchen cooking pasta, one portion the way I had learned to cook now, when my doorbell camera buzzed. She stood there on the screen with puffy eyes, a messy ponytail, gripping the strap of her purse like it was a lifeline. She looked the way she always looked when she wanted something, wounded and slightly rehearsed. Part of me, the part Dr. Grant kept encouraging me to listen to, wondered if maybe she had changed. If maybe the church meeting had cracked something open inside her. So I opened the door. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "Please." I let her inside. I poured her a glass of water. Then I sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where Lucas's booster seat still occupied the fourth chair, and waited. Olivia cried for 10 straight minutes. Real tears or practiced ones, I honestly couldn't tell anymore. Finally, she wiped her face on her sleeve and began speaking. "Wendy, I can't deal with this anymore. Everyone hates us. Mom won't stop crying. Dad barely talks. I miss you." Her eyes drifted toward the refrigerator, where Emma's drawing still hung. I miss Emma and Lucas too. It was the first time she had said their names since sending that emoji text months earlier. "I know I wasn't there," she continued. "I know it was wrong, but you have to understand, Mom said we'd visit the next week. I always listen to Mom." I nodded slowly. "I understand." She relaxed slightly, smoothing her hair as the tears slowed. Then the real conversation finally surfaced. "So, Daniel left you money, right?" she said carefully. "The article mentioned the foundation, $3.8 million? She tried to sound casual. It didn't work. "That's a lot to manage alone," she continued quickly. "I could help. Maybe serve on the board or something. I'm between jobs right now." I set my glass down. "Olivia," I said quietly, "you didn't come to their funeral. You didn't call me for 3 months. And the first real conversation we've had since then, you're asking about money." Her face flushed red. "That's not what I meant. I think you should go." She stood abruptly and grabbed her purse. At the door, she turned back with the only weapon she had ever learned to use. "Mom is going to be really upset about this." I closed the door gently, the same way you close something you don't intend to open again. The next morning, I called Andrew Caldwell. "My family is starting to reach out," I said. "Not because they're sorry, because they found out about the money." Andrew was quiet for a moment. I could hear him setting his pen down. "What do you need, Wendy?" "Protection, for the foundation and for myself." He explained everything calmly, the way he always did. The Carter Legacy Foundation was a separate legal entity, a registered nonprofit with its own board, its own accounts, and its own governance. No family member had any claim to it. My personal inheritance from Daniel's insurance policy was exactly that, personal. Under North Carolina law, life insurance proceeds go directly to the named beneficiary. No parent, sibling, or relative can challenge it. "But what about the pressure?" I asked. "The calls, showing up at my house, the guilt trips." "We send a letter," Andrew said. "A cease and desist notice." He explained it carefully. The letter would formally request that they stop contacting me without invitation, stop appearing at my home, and stop approaching anyone connected to the foundation. "It's not a lawsuit," he added, "and it isn't legally binding on its own. But it establishes a record. If the harassment continues, we'll have documentation to support a restraining order." I thought about the word boundary. Dr. Grant used it every week. Until that moment, it had always sounded theoretical, something you read about in psychology books, not something you mailed to your own mother. Send it, I said. Andrew paused. Are you sure? Once this letter goes out, the tone changes. I glanced toward the kitchen counter. Daniel's coffee mug was still there, still unwashed. I kept it that way on purpose. A small act of defiance against a world that kept urging me to move on faster than I could. Andrew, I said quietly. The tone changed the night they chose a birthday party over 3 funerals. The letter went out the following Monday by certified mail. 3 copies, 3 addresses, 3 members of a family that had spent my entire life treating my silence as permission. The silence was over. Charlotte called Andrew's office 48 hours after the letter arrived. His receptionist later told me she could hear her voice through the phone from across the room. A cease and desist from my own daughter? How dare you turn my child against her family? Andrew took the call himself. Later he told me his voice stayed perfectly even the entire time. Mrs. Bennett, he said calmly. I represent Wendy's legal interests. The letter is clear. Please respect its terms. She isn't thinking clearly, Charlotte snapped. Grief has made her irrational. The terms are clear. Have a good day. And he hung up. But Charlotte wasn't finished. She never was. Within a week she had written a letter of her own, handwritten on expensive cream-colored stationery, the kind she used for church correspondence. She mailed copies to 6 members of the Women's Fellowship. In it, she described a daughter consumed by grief and manipulated by outside influences, a family torn apart by bad advice and misunderstanding, and a mother desperately trying to save her child before it was too late. She asked them to pray. She asked them to intervene. She asked them to see her as the one who had been wronged. One of those letters eventually reached Pastor Elaine Harper. That evening, she sat alone at her desk reading it. Later, she told me she held the paper for nearly an hour, turning it over in her hands, feeling the weight of the stationery and the emptiness of the story written on it. Finally, she picked up the phone. Charlotte, she said calmly, I've been patient, but I was at that funeral. I saw those empty seats. Her voice was quiet, but absolutely final. I will not share this letter, and I think it's time you stop telling people a story that isn't true. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a click. For the first time in Charlotte Bennett's life, someone in her community had looked her straight in the eye, even if it was through a phone line, and said, I don't believe you. Pastor Elaine called me that same evening. Wendy, I thought you should know, she said gently. Your mother isn't stopping. But the truth isn't stopping either. 6 months after the article, just past the first anniversary of the accident, the Carter Legacy Foundation, now officially recognized as a 501c3 with Safe Roads Carolina as our anchor partner, hosted its first fundraising gala. We booked Magnolia Gardens Event Hall, a bright venue overlooking rows of late summer roses. It wasn't flashy or corporate, just a room filled with light and people who genuinely cared. 150 guests attended. My colleagues from the ER filled 2 entire tables. Representatives from Safe Roads Carolina came from across the state. Nathan Brooks arrived with a photographer from the Triangle Chronicle. Several families we had already helped sat in the front row, including Isabella Torres from Greensboro, whose son's funeral we had paid for when she could barely afford a simple wooden casket. Andrew Caldwell handled the logistics. Pastor Elaine delivered the opening invocation. The event coordinator I'd hired, a former social worker named Janet, managed the silent auction. Everything about the night felt deliberate, hard-earned, real. When it was time for my speech, I stepped up to the podium and looked out over the room. Behind me, a large screen displayed 3 photographs. Daniel wearing his old college sweatshirt, smiling wide. Emma on her first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed and holding a butterfly lunchbox. Lucas at the beach with Captain the Bear tucked under his arm, sandy and soaked from the waves. I gripped the edge of the podium for a moment, steadying myself. Then I began. My husband Daniel believed in preparing for the worst, so the people he loved could still have the best, I said. I paused. He never imagined how right he would be. I swallowed before continuing. But because of him, 5 families this year didn't have to face their worst moments alone. 12 children still have a parent who can pay rent this month. 8 survivors are receiving counseling. And 3 funerals were held with dignity instead of debt. The room erupted in applause. Isabella Torres stood first, then others followed. The entire audience rose to their feet. Nathan's photographer captured the moment, me at the podium, Daniel's photograph glowing on the screen behind me, the crowd standing. I didn't notice them at first. But after the applause faded and I stepped down from the stage, I glanced toward the back of the room near the emergency exit. 2 familiar figures sat in the last row, half hidden behind a pillar. Charlotte and Olivia. They hadn't been invited. Janet later told me they slipped in during dinner service when the check-in table was unattended. She had noticed them but decided not to create a scene in the middle of the event. My mother stood near the coat rack wearing her lavender church dress, the same one from the church meeting, her armor. She waited until the crowd around me thinned, until I was standing alone beside the dessert table holding a glass of water I hadn't touched. Then she walked toward me. "Wendy?" she said softly, her voice thick and carefully practiced, eyes shining beneath the lights. "I'm so proud of you." 4 words. Words I had waited 34 years to hear. And they arrived here, under stage lighting, in front of photographers, surrounded by 150 witnesses at an event she had crashed. The timing told me everything the words didn't. "Thank you for coming," I said politely, my tone distant. "The way you speak to a colleague you barely know." Charlotte flinched, only slightly, a tiny movement at the corner of her mouth, but I saw it. "Can we talk?" she whispered. "Somewhere private?" "There's nothing to discuss privately that hasn't already been said publicly." "I'm your mother, Wendy." "I know," I replied, holding her gaze. "That's what made it hurt." Olivia hurried over to stand beside her, breathing a little too fast, as if she had been gathering courage from across the room. "Wendy, please," she said. "We're here now. We showed up." I looked at my sister. She said it like the words should erase everything. Like simply being present now somehow canceled the past. "You're 6 months late, Olivia." Before either of them could respond, Andrew appeared beside me, calm, professional, perfectly timed. "Wendy," he said quietly, "the Safe Roads Carolina representative needs a quick word before she leaves." I nodded. "Excuse me," I said, to both of them, to neither of them, and walked away. I didn't look back. Later, Janet told me what happened after that. Charlotte stood in the center of that bright room holding a glass of sparkling water she never touched. No one approached her. No one spoke to her. No one offered a seat. Eventually, Olivia tugged on her sleeve, and the 2 of them slipped quietly out through the emergency exit. For the first time in her life, Charlotte Bennett walked into a room and discovered she was the least important person there. The consequences came slowly. No shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations, just the quiet, steady reshaping of a community's loyalties. 2 weeks after the gala, Charlotte received a call from the Hope Valley Community Church office. The Women's Fellowship was restructuring its leadership committee. Her role as co-chair, a position she had held for 12 years, the centerpiece of her social identity, was being rotated to new voices. They thanked her for her years of service. They wished her well. The message beneath those words was unmistakable. Charlotte stopped attending Sunday services after that. The first week she was absent. No one called to check on her. The second week, someone mentioned it during coffee hour, and Margaret Collins simply said, "She probably needs some time." No one argued, no one disagreed, no one reached for a phone. The neighborhood shifted too. In June, Linda Prescott organized the annual block party, a role Charlotte had controlled for nearly a decade. When the invitations were sent out, the Bennett house was not on the list. Olivia's social circle slowly unraveled. Friends who used to message daily stopped replying. A group chat she had been part of since high school grew silent whenever she posted. By April, she had started seeing a therapist. Whether that came from genuine regret or the pressure of social fallout, I couldn't say. Maybe both. People are complicated, even the ones who hurt you. Then one Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it without opening it. Something made me read it first. I should have said something that night. I know that now. I'm sorry, kiddo. Not because of the article, because I was wrong. Dad. I read it once, then again, then a third time. At my next therapy appointment, I showed the message to Dr. Grant. How does it feel? She asked. I thought about the question carefully before answering. It feels like a door, I said finally. One I don't need to open yet, but maybe someday. I saved the message. I didn't reply. Not yet. 1 year later, November 14th again. A Tuesday, just like the first one. The sky over Raleigh was the same dull gray. The air carried that damp chill that slips beneath your collar and refuses to leave. Before work, I drove to the cemetery. The graves were well kept. I paid for regular maintenance and visited on the 1st and 15th of every month. But this day was different. This was the anniversary, the day everyone warns you about. I brought flowers, sunflowers for Daniel because he always said roses were boring. A small bouquet of daisies arranged like butterflies for Emma. The florist had started making them specially for me. And for Lucas, a new stuffed captain. The original had been buried with him, but I kept replacing it. Somehow that ritual felt right, like something he would understand. I sat on the grass between the 3 headstones and talked to them the way I always did, out loud, without embarrassment. The way I used to talk to Daniel when he was cooking dinner and I was folding laundry in the next room. I told them about the foundation, about Isabella Torres, whose son now had a proper headstone instead of an unmarked number. About a family in Fayetteville whose landlord had nearly evicted them a week after their daughter's accident. About the grief counselor we hired full-time in January. Then I told Daniel about his letter, how I kept it in my nightstand, how I read the last line whenever the house grew too quiet, how I finally understood what he had been doing during those Sunday evenings behind the locked office door. Not hiding from me, preparing for the worst. Building a wall between me and the life he feared I might one day face alone. You always said I take care of everyone except myself, I whispered. I'm trying, Daniel. I really am. The wind picked up slightly. The sunflowers bent sideways. Behind me, a red cardinal landed on a tree branch and stayed there, watching quietly with one dark eye. I was different now. Not healed, I don't think that word truly fits, but steadier. I said no when I meant no. I stopped apologizing for existing, and I no longer cooked dinner for people who had never earned a place at my table. Dr. Grant once told me, "You're not the same person you were a year ago." No, I said. I'm the person I should have been all along. If you're listening right now, and you recognize pieces of your own family in this story, the dismissal, the guilt trips, the way they make your pain feel like an inconvenience, I want you to hear something clearly. You are not crazy, you are not dramatic, and you are not ungrateful. Setting boundaries with family has been the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than 12-hour ER shifts. Harder than reading Daniel's letter for the first time. Harder even than standing in front of 3 caskets in the rain. Because grief is something the world understands. When you're grieving, people bring flowers. They lower their voices. They give you space. But when you set a boundary with family, suddenly half the world tells you you're wrong. She's still your mother. Blood is thicker than water. You'll regret this when she's gone. I've heard every one of those sentences, from coworkers, from neighbors, even from strangers commenting under Nathan's article. And I understand why people say them. They're not cruel. They just haven't lived through what I did. They've never sat on a hospital floor at 10 o'clock at night, listening to birthday music through a phone speaker 3 hours after their entire world ended. Here's the truth I had to learn the hardest way possible. The lesson no one prepares you for, the one you only understand after life breaks your heart open. The people who truly love you will show up. Not with excuses, not with conditions, not maybe next week. They show up when it matters most. Daniel showed up every single day of our marriage. When life was ordinary, he showed up. When things were hard, he showed up even more. My coworkers showed up too, standing in the rain in black scrubs straight after their shifts. Pastor Elaine showed up, Nathan showed up, and today, every family the foundation helps. They've become part of my family too. That's what real family looks like. Not blood, not obligation, presence. I'm not here to tell anyone to cut their parents out of their lives. That decision is deeply personal, and only you can make it. But there is something I wish someone had told me years ago. Your peace is not negotiable, and sometimes protecting your peace means learning to draw a boundary. A boundary is not cruelty. A boundary is not revenge. A boundary is the moment you decide that your pain will no longer be ignored just to keep someone else comfortable. For most of my life, I believed that being a good daughter meant saying yes. Yes to expectations. Yes to guilt. Yes to silence. But real healing began the moment I learned how to say no. No to manipulation. No to pretending everything was fine. No to people who treated my worst day like an inconvenience. If someone treats the worst moment of your life like it doesn't matter, you have every right to build a life where they no longer get front row seats. Because love doesn't disappear when you set boundaries. But self-respect begins there. So where do things stand now? My father still sends the occasional text. Short messages. Quiet ones. Never demanding. Thinking of you today. Saw a butterfly at the hardware store. It reminded me of Emma. I read every message. I haven't replied yet, but I haven't blocked him either. For now, that distance feels right. Charlotte is still Charlotte. Last month, she asked a family friend, Patricia Morgan, to call me. I hadn't spoken to Patricia since high school. 10 minutes into the conversation, she casually mentioned, "Your mother hasn't been doing well lately. Her blood pressure, her nerves." Same strategy, same script. I recognized it immediately, the way you recognize a song you've heard too many times. I wished Patricia well and ended the call. Olivia sent me a letter recently. Not on Charlotte's expensive cream stationery, just notebook paper, messy handwriting, words crossed out and rewritten. "I'm in therapy now," she wrote. "I'm starting to see things I didn't want to see before. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know." I placed the letter in my nightstand drawer beside Daniel's. Maybe one day I'll answer it. Maybe I won't. Forgiveness isn't a door I've permanently locked. But it isn't a door I'll open just because someone knocks. Meanwhile, the foundation continues to grow. In our second year, we helped 15 families rebuild their lives after drunk driving tragedies. Safe Roads Carolina is now a full partner. Recently, I testified at the state capitol about DUI sentencing reform, and I said yes. I still work the night shift at St. Matthew Medical Center. I still wear the same scrubs. I still clock in at 7 and leave at 7. The money didn't change who I am. It simply allowed me to build something meaningful around the life I already had. And every night before I fall asleep, I whisper the same words into the quiet of a house that isn't truly empty. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Emma. Good night, Lucas. I carried your love today. I'll carry it again tomorrow. Last week, a 4-year-old girl came into the ER after falling from a swing. Her wrist was fractured, not serious, just routine, but she held a stuffed rabbit and cried exactly the way Lucas used to cry. That breathless cry that isn't really about pain. It's about fear. About needing someone to say, "You're okay. I'm here." I held her hand while Dr. Aaron Sullivan set the splint. I told her she was brave. I told her the rabbit was brave too. She stopped crying and asked if the rabbit could have a bandage, so I wrapped a piece of gauze around its paw. She smiled so wide that something inside my chest cracked open again. I stepped into the supply closet for a moment. 30 seconds. 30 seconds to breathe, to steady myself, to let the wave pass. Then I went back out, finished my shift, and drove home. Grief never really disappears. It simply changes shape. Some days it crashes over you like a wave. Other days it's just a whisper. But that whisper is proof of something beautiful, that you loved someone deeply, and love never expires. Daniel left me $3.8 million. But the greatest thing he left behind wasn't money. It was a lesson I'm still learning every single day, through every shift, every family the foundation helps, and every visit to those 3 graves with fresh flowers and a new Captain the Bear for Lucas. Show up. Not next week, not when it's convenient, not after the party ends. Show up now. Because when someone you love is standing in the worst moment of their life, your presence might be the only thing holding their world together. My name is Wendy Bennett. I'm an ER nurse, a widow, a mother of angels, and the founder of the Carter Legacy Foundation. I'm still standing today. Not because my family held me up, but because I finally learned how to stand up for myself. And sometimes, standing up for yourself begins with one simple thing: drawing a boundary. And that's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. Now I'd love to hear yours. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you love? What happened? Share. If Wendy's journey gave you even a little strength today, consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next video.